Hello everyone, get to mad here. Let's get mad about A Christmas Carol. Okay, so we are now reading Stave 5. So we're almost there. We should be able to finish this last stave, this last chapter in two goes, in two videos. So remember, he at the end of Stave 4, Scrooge has woken up to find himself back in his bedroom. Yes, and the bedpost was his own, the bed was his own, the room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future, Scrooge repeated, as he scrambled out of bed. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. O Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, O Jacob, on my knees. He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice would scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. So he's back in his room. The bedpost was his own. So remember, the ghost had kind of faded into the bedpost. It had changed from being what it was to becoming the bedpost. It's his bed in his room. And this here is more metaphorical, saying that he's got the time to change his ways. So to amend means to change, but in this case, means to change your ways. And as it says there, he repeats what he said earlier in the last chapter. Okay, so this is fairly straightforward. Yeah, okay. And flutter means to kind of jump around and shining with his good intentions. Broken voice. So this bit here means that he could barely speak. He'd been crying violently in his battle with the spirit, and yeah, so his face was wet with tears. That's fairly straightforward. They are not torn down, cried Scrooge, folding one of his bed curtains in his arms. They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here, and I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. His hands were busy with his garments all this time, turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance. I don't know what to do, cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath, and making a perfect lacoon of himself with his stockings. I am as light as a feather. I am as happy as an angel. I am as merry as a schoolboy. I am as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody, a Happy New Year to all the world. Hello there, whoop, hello. He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there, perfectly winded. Okay, so all of this means that, so remember in the last chapter, he had seen that his servants had stolen his bed curtains and bedding and everything, but they are still here, and he's here, and all the possible future that he's been shown won't happen or can maybe dispelled, maybe made to disappear, maybe got rid of. Okay. So in other words, that he can change his ways and change the future. And garments means clothes. So he's basically dressing himself up now, but he's so excited that he's kind of all over the place, tearing them and putting them in the wrong place. Extravagance means lack of restraint. So yeah, this is just Dickens being descriptive. Like as Scrooge puts his clothes on, and he says, "Oh, I don't know what to do." He's laughing and crying at the same time. So I pronounce this Lacoon. Strictly speaking, it should be Laocoon. Don't worry too much about that, just in case you're interested. This is a reference to ancient Greek mythology, the Trojan War, and Laocoon was a priest who warned the Trojans about the wooden horse, and he was killed by two serpents wrapped, and obviously the serpents would have wrapped around him. That's how serpent snakes, big snakes, kill you by suffocating you, basically. So it just means that he's wrapping his stockings all around him and almost suffocating himself. And then here we know that Dickens loves lists. Normally it's lists of words or adjectives. Here it's a list of similes. right? So these are all similes. All of these here. Giddy means dizzy. And then he now starts to say, Merry, even though there's nobody there, he starts to wish everybody Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. So remember, he refused to do that before and he's greeting people, but there's nobody there. He's just excited and happy. So frisky means playful and energetic. So you hear him like a little schoolboy or little puppy. And winded means out of breath. "There's the saucepan that the gruel was in," cried Scrooge, starting off again, and going around the fireplace. "There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas Present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened. Ha ha ha." Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. "I don't know what day of the month it is," said Scrooge. "I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind. I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello, whoop, hello here." He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Clash, clang, hammer, ding dong bell, bell dong ding, hammer, clang, clash. Oh, glorious, glorious! Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring, cold, cold, piping for the blood to dance to, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. Oh, glorious, glorious! "What's to-day?" cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes who perhaps had loitered in to look about him. Okay, so let's just go back here. So there's the saucepan with the gruel. So remember, that's what he was eating at the beginning. And there's the door. And so he's just remembering. So basically, what we've got here is a cyclical structure. Okay, we're kind of ending back where we started. So cyclical structures are quite common in literature because they're quite very effective. Macbeth has a cyclical structure, if you remember. And yeah, so that's all fairly straightforward. And then he starts to laugh. Splendid means wonderful. Illustrious normally means like an example, the best example, somebody who's famous. But here, Dickens is saying that the laughter, the way he laughs, is the way we should all laugh. And this line here is a bit confusing. It means that it's not the first laugh. Sorry, it's the first laugh he's laughed for a long time, but it's not the last laugh that he's going to laugh from now on. So, in other words, from now on, he's going to be laughing many, many times. Okay. And he says, I don't know what day it is, what time it is, how long it's been, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, so this is all just Dickens showing how happy he is. Um, and then checked means stopped. Transports means when you're overjoyed. So, not just transport in terms of bus or train, but carried away in his mind and in his heart. And he hears the church bells ringing. So lusty meaning with full of energy. So peals are the ringings of the bell. And then all of this, what is this? What techniques, what kind of words are these, and what kind of techniques is Dickens using here? So lots of onomatopoeia, repetition, listing. And then he runs to the window and looks out. There's no fog or mist. It's all clear and bright. This means jolly. Stirring cold. So stirring here means that it's so cold that it kind of makes you full of energy, stirs you up, gives you more energy. Golden sunlight. So it's cold, but there's a bit of sun as well. So yeah, I mean, this is all fairly straightforward. So again, lots of repetition and listing and exclamations to show how excited and happy he is. And then he's leaning in the window, out of the window, and there's a boy passing by in Sunday clothes. Sunday clothes meaning best clothes. People would dress up in their best clothes on a Sunday. Loiter means to hang around. So this boy maybe has heard Scrooge and he's kind of stopped to find out what's going on. Okay, so, hey, returned the boy with all his might of wonder. What's today, my fine fellow? Said Scrooge. Today, replied the boy. Why, Christmas Day? It's Christmas Day, said Scrooge to himself. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello, returned the boy. Do you know the poulterers in the next street, but one at the corner? Scrooge inquired. I should hope I did, replied the lad. An intelligent boy, said Scrooge. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one. Okay, so the boy says, What? In his might of wonder. In other words, he's really surprised. Now, it's possible that the boy actually knows Scrooge, so because people all used to live, didn't really move far from the area they lived in, and they all knew each other in those days. Nowadays, we kind of tend to keep to ourselves, even our neighbors. We only get to know them maybe after years. But, or he might just be surprised at why Scrooge is, why anybody would be shouting like this. Anyway, so he asked him what day it is. That's very straightforward. And yeah, this is fairly straightforward that the spirits can do anything. And we know that Dickens has played with time. And then he says, Do you know where the chicken shop is? And the boy says, Of course I do. And I mean, this obviously the boy does. I mean, the boy could well be clever and intelligent, but this is just Scrooge being nice. Okay, normally in the past he would be rude to people for no reason whatsoever, and he's asked, have they sold that the big prize turkey? So maybe they've had some kind of a turkey competition to see which turkey is the biggest and the most beautiful. So that would be the biggest one, and this one would be the little one. And so yeah, that's fairly straightforward. What, the one as big as me? Returned the boy. What a delightful boy, said Scrooge. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there now, replied the boy. Is it? Said Scrooge. Go and buy it. What? Exclaimed the boy. No, no, said Scrooge. I am in earnest. Go and buy it, and tell him to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at a trigger, who could have got off who could have got a shot off half so fast. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's, whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands and splitting with a laugh. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never made such a joke as sending it to Bob's will be. Okay, so that obviously is a bit funny. So he says, Oh, delightful boy. Buck means an energetic young fellow. And the boy says he's still there. Scrooge says, Go and buy it. Now, this is an old term for get lost, you're joking. And it's named after some chap called Walker in those days. We don't need to worry too much about it. And Scrooge said, No, 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 I mean it. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here so that I can tell them where to take it. And then he says, Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. So that's about 12 pence. And if you come back in 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown, which would have been about 30 pence. Not that you need to worry about that. And the boy runs off quickly because he wants the money. And this is just a metaphor. Dickens saying that the best or quickest shot in the world wouldn't have been as quick as the boy. And he's going to send it to Bob Cratchit. And he's laughing his head off. And but notice that uh, he's not going to announce it. So the best people do charity without telling anyone, not necessarily showing off about it. And obviously, this is exaggeration here. This is a reference to some actor in that at that time and some book that was written about jokes. We don't need to worry too much about that, but just out of interest. The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did, somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. I shall love it as long as I live, cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Here's the turkey. Hello, Whoop, how are you? Merry Christmas. It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped 'em short off in a minute, like sticks of sealing wax. Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town, said Scrooge. You must have a cab. The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and chuckled till he cried. Okay, so this just means that maybe because he's still excited, or maybe because he's tired from the his night's experiences. But anyway, he manages to write down the address, and then he goes down to wait for the chicken man. So in those days, people would have been quite happy to do personal services for people. If you're, in case you're wondering why the shopman would come to his house, but especially because Scrooge is rich, that's why the man would be quite happy to come. And then he looks at the knocker. So remember, this all started when he saw Marley's face on the knocker of the door, and he pats the knocker with his hand, saying, "I will love it," because that's what started everything that changed him into a new man, and he hardly noticed it before. So this line here doesn't mean that it's actually got a face on it. Maybe it's shaped like a face, but he's just kind of thinking about Marley's face right now, and maybe seeing his face in there, but in a good way. And yeah, so anyway, this is all fairly straightforward. And the turkey arrives, and it's huge, so huge that he's wondering how on earth it would have stood on its legs. And here's a simile. I mean, don't need to worry too much about this. So sealing wax in those days, the envelopes were not pre-glued. Okay, you would have to put seal on them, like glue on them. Anyway, but it's so big, he's thinking the boy surely can't carry the turkey to all the way to Camden Town, which would have been which is quite a few miles away from. We don't know where Scrooge lives, but somewhere in central London. So he says, "I'm going to get you a cab." And the chuckle means laughs, and Dickens repeats laugh or chuckle every time. So he pays for the turkey, pays for the cab. So remember, this is Scrooge here, the stingiest man alive. He's bought the biggest turkey, he's paying for a cab, okay? Recompense the boy, so he pays back or pays the boy for the money that he promised him. And he just keeps chuckling, he keeps laughing till he cries. Shaving was not an easy task, for his hand continued to shake very much. Sorry, let's just double check. Yeah. And shaving requires attention, even when you don't dance while you're at it. But if he had cut the end of his nose off, he would have put a piece of sticking plaster over it and been quite satisfied. He dressed himself all in his best and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every one with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that three or four good-humoured fellows said, "Good morning, sir, and Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. He had not gone far when, coming on towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting house the day before, and said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe." It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met, but he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. "My dear sir," said Scrooge, quickening his pace, and taking the old gentleman by both his hands, "how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir." Okay, so yeah, so after the boy is gone, Scrooge shaves and his hands are still shaking, either from excitement or from the previous night. And in fact, we can see here that it's probably from the excitement. He's still dancing with happiness. But just to show how happy he is, Dickens says that even if he had cut his nose off, he would have just put a plaster on it and not worried about it. And then he dresses in his Sunday best, and then he goes out walking, and the people are pouring out as the great ghost of Christmas present had shown him. And he's walking along, and he looks at everybody with a delighted smile, and he looks so happy and pleasant that some people greet him with good morning and Merry Christmas. And Scrooge often said afterwards, so blithe means happy and carefree, that these were the happiest words that he ever heard. And then as he's walking along, he sees, to behold means to see, the slightly plump gentleman who had come. So remember, this is back in chapter one, the men had come to looking for charity. So again, this idea of cyclical structure to his office. And pang means a sharp, sudden sharp feeling. So he feels that in his heart to think what they would have thought of him, that the fact that he's so stingy and didn't care about the poor and said they could go to prison or the workhouse. But this just poetically saying that I mean, he could have crossed the street and tried to avoid them, but actually he doesn't. And in fact, he goes quicker so that he can meet the gentleman sooner, shakes him by both hands, greets him, and then this means that I hope you succeeded in collecting as much charity money as possible. Obviously, not from Scrooge, but from other people. And it was very kind of you to go out in the cold collecting money for the poor. And the man says, Mr. Scrooge? Yes, said Scrooge. That is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon, and you will have the goodness, here Scrooge whispered in his ear. Lord bless me, cried the gentleman, as if his breath were taken away. My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious? If you please, said Scrooge, not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favour? My dear sir, said the other, shaking hands with him, I don't know what to say to such munif. Don't say anything, please, retorted Scrooge. Come and see me. Will you come and see me? I will, cried the old gentleman, and it was clear he meant to do it. Okay, so he says, "Oh, Mr. Scrooge." So he's obviously puzzled by this change in behavior, and Scrooge knows that. So he says, "Yes, that's my name, and I know you won't like the sound of it, and I beg your pardon." And then he says this, and then he whispers in his ear, basically saying that he wants to give a certain amount of money for charity. And obviously, the gentleman can't believe it. Are you serious? And he says, "Yes, not a farthing less. A farthing is like a quarter of a penny." And he's saying that basically he's implying that although it sounds like a lot of money that he's giving, actually, because he hasn't given any charity for so long, if you add it all up, it actually wouldn't be that much. Assure you means to promise, and he says, "Will you come and get the money?" And he says, "Yes, I will." I don't know what to say. And this word here, he's about to say munificence, munificence, which means great generosity. And Scrooge says, "Don't say anything. Come and see me, please." And the man says, "Of course I will." "Thank ye," said Scrooge. "I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you." He went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro, and patted children on the head and questioned beggars, and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows, and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything, could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it. "Is your master at home, my dear?" said Scrooge to the girl. "Nice girl, very." "Yes, sir." "Where is he, my love?" said Scrooge. "He's in the dining room, sir, along with mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please." Okay, so this is just an old spelling for thank you. Obliged means to be in debt to someone. And then he goes to church, he walks around, he just watches people going to and fro from. And in those days, you could do this, and it was considered a good, nice thing to do, but obviously, you shouldn't do it nowadays. And he talks to the beggars, and he looks into people. Again, nowadays, you wouldn't do this, but this was back then. And everything just to yield means to give. But basically, he's just enjoying walking around, seeing people. He's been so closed off in his own mind that he's forgotten the pleasure of just being with people. As he says there, just a walk and just seeing people could give him so much happiness. And then finally, in the afternoon, he goes to his nephew's house. But obviously, he's scared to go in because of the way he's behaved towards his nephew over the past few years. But eventually, he makes up his mind and goes to the door and knocks on it. And he says to the girl, "Is your master at home? Is the nephew at home?" And this is just implying that he's changed his whole attitude towards people. He's seeing everybody as in a positive light. And she says, "Yes, sir." And where is he? That's very straightforward. And obviously, that's the wife, the nephew's wife. And she says, "I'll show you upstairs." "Thank ye. He knows me," said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock. "I'll go in here, my dear." He turned it gently and sidled his face in round the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in great array, for these young housekeepers are always nervous on such points and like to see that everything is right. "Fred," said Scrooge. Dear heart alive, how his niece by marriage started! Scrooge had forgotten, for the moment, about her sitting in the corner with the footstool, or he wouldn't have done it on any account. "Why, bless my soul!" cried Fred. "Who's that?" "It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" "Let him in? It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness." And he says, "Thank you, but don't worry, he knows me." So he goes into the dining room anyway, and he turns it gently and kind of sidle means to move sideways. But so he pops his face around the door, and they're all looking at the table, and there's plenty of food. And what this means is that, well, as a host, you always want to have more food than less. You don't want to run out and people being hungry. So he calls to him, "Fred," and this is just a phrase. His niece is surprised and shocked. Yeah, started and needs to be moved suddenly from surprise. And Scrooge had forgotten that she was sitting on the footstool, and he wouldn't have done it, meaning that she might have fallen off the stool. And he says, "Bless my soul," says Fred, his nephew. "Who's that?" And obviously, this is fairly straightforward. "I've come to dinner. Will you let me in?" And this is obviously just rhetorical. And he shakes his hand so much that almost takes his arm off. And what this means is that Scrooge feels at home in 5 minutes, even though he hasn't been there for years. He feels very welcomed. Everybody's happy. His niece looks just the same. So Topper, remember, is a young man who likes the other sister, and with this one here, the plump sister, and she arrives, and everybody arrives, and they all look the same, and everybody's happy, and they have a wonderful party and games, and unanimity means everybody in agreement, nobody arguing, so everybody's wonderful and happy. Okay, so we'll stop there and just move to the final slide. As always, please do subscribe and tell all your friends if you found this video useful. And I'll see you in the next video where we will finish off this final bit of the book.